Today is going to start our first day of two-column proofs. Okay, so a two-column proof you are going to have two different columns, one that's going to list the steps, and then the other one is going to list justifications. So the steps we call statements. And then the matching reason is going to be the second column. Okay, so you're going to have two columns. One is going to say statements, the other one is going to say reasons. Okay, so this is how your chart is going to be set up, and then you're going to have to fill in this case, we're filling in our reasons. So we have to write a justification for each step. So basically, we're just going to prove why this is true. So we are given that angle A and angle B are supplementary, and the measure of angle A equals 45 degrees. So for whatever statements you are given, you want them to be in the first statement. Sometimes they'll actually be broken up into two statements, but for the most part, they are going to be in the first. And then your reason is going to be given. So you always want to start with your given statement. Okay, so always start with your given statement. Okay, so I'm going to give you a second to read through all of the statements on the left side. So go ahead and just take a few seconds to do that. Okay, so Jay, will you just read for us what we were given in step one?
Angle A and angle B are supplementary, and the measure of angle A is 45 degrees.
Okay, so angle A and angle B are supplementary. Avery, what do we know about two angles that are supplementary?
They have to equal 180.
Okay, so the sum of those measures are going to equal 180, which is exactly what we have here. If A and B are supplementary, then we know that the two measures are going to equal 180. So that's just by definition of supplementary angles. So that's what we're going to write for our reason. Definition of supplementary angles. And you guys can abbreviate supplementary SUPP. So definition of supplementary angles. And then this will be my symbol for angle. And then the next step, it says 45 degrees plus the measure of angle B equals 180. So let's look at what happened from one step to the other. Okay. So the only thing that happened, Brendan, what do you notice from the equation in part 2 to the equation in part 3?
I changed measure of angle A 45 degrees.
Okay, and then do you know what we call that?
Substitution.
Yes. Okay, so we knew that the measure of angle A was 45, so we could substitute that into our equation. Okay, and then let's look at our last step. Tanner, what are you thinking about that? How do we go from 45 plus the measure of angle B equals 180 to the measure of angle B equals 135?
180 minus 45.
Okay, so you subtracted 45 from both sides, right? Okay, so that would be the subtraction property. of equality. And you can just put of and then the equals. Okay, you do want to write out subtraction instead of just writing sub, because sub could also be what?
Substitution could be subdivision.
Okay,
Sub-
so
Article.
for our next example, what we're gonna do is we have to fill in the blanks. So for the first one, we were just writing all of the reasons. Okay, for this one, we're also gonna have to write some statements. Okay, so you have two things. You have the given and then what you're trying to prove. Okay, so you have the given. B is the midpoint of AC and AB is congruent to EF. And then you also have what you are trying to prove. I guess you can't really see that too much. Okay, so the given statement is what you are going to start with. Your prove, whatever they give you for your prove is going to be your last statement. Okay, so BC is congruent to F. This should be your last statement. Because once you've proved it, you are done. Okay, which means really we could fill in two of our boxes here. So we know first that B is the midpoint of AC. And AB is congruent to EF. And then we also know the last statement is that BC is congruent to EF. Okay, and we were already given the reason for the first one is given. But even if they didn't give that to us, we would know that is given. Notice that the final statement, it says the transitive property. I never want to see for your last reason that it's prove, because that means nothing. Okay, you have to tell me how we got here. So first it says B is the midpoint of AC and AB is congruent to EF. So from there we go from AB is congruent to BC. So let's think about that first statement. So the first statement says B is the midpoint of AC. So I'm just going to draw a picture. Okay, if B is the midpoint of AC, then Aiden, what do I know? If I know that B is the midpoint, what's something else I know on here?
That all the points are congruent.
Not all the points. But what is congruent?
The segment.
The two segments are congruent, right? So the segment AB will be congruent to the segment BC, which is what we have there. So we got that simply from the fact that B is the midpoint of AC, and so our reason is just going to be the definition of a midpoint. And that is usually going to be your next step whenever you are given that something is the midpoint of a certain segment. Your next statement is going to be that those two are congruent, and then that's going to be because of the definition of a midpoint. Okay, so we know B is the midpoint, so we have AB is congruent to EF. Then we know AB is congruent to BC.
I'm just like collapse.
So if AB is congruent to EF, and we have AB is congruent to BC, then we can say BC is congruent to EF, and you could use the transitive property, or you could also use what? What's something else you could use? If I know that AB is congruent to EF and AB is congruent to BC, how could I get BC is congruent to EF? Really, what am I doing here? I have two different statements and I'm doing what? Yeah, substitution, right? You can plug one into the other one. Okay, so instead of the transitive property, you could also use the substitution property. That would be Okay, what questions do you guys have for me so far? These are gonna take some practice. Okay, so on the back, it says use the plan to write a 2-column proof. I'm gonna give you a minute to read through those. And then I want you to see if you can start your proof. If you guys need to, you can also have out your chapter 2 word bank. Your chapter 2 word bank gives you a whole list of reasons that you can use. Okay, remember your reasons have to be postulates, definitions, and of course your first reason is always what? Given. Your first reason is always what?
Given.
And given is always the
Statement.
first reason. Okay, so you guys should have that down. Okay, so you should have already had time now to write that angle 1 and angle 2 are sups. And angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. And your reason is that is given to you. There's one other box you should already have filled in. Can anybody tell me what box? Yeah, Robert.
The last one,
The last one, and what, the statement or the reason?
angle 3 and angle 2 are supplementary.
Okay, and so which box is it gonna be in, the statement or the reason? Okay, so in the statement, angle 3 and angle 2 are supplementary. Okay, so on a test or a quiz, if you had to fill this in, at the very least, you should be getting points for these three spaces, right? The first statement, the first reason, okay, and then the last statement. So this is always what you have to prove. This is always what you're given. Okay, do we think we got that part down? Okay, now this one gives you a plan so you can follow that plan. It says use the definitions of supplementary and congruent angles and substitution to show that the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180. By the definition of supplementary angles, angle 3 and angle 2 are supplementary. So this kind of walks you through it. So if we're going to use the definition of supplementary angles, if we know that angles 1 and 2 are supplementary, Luke, what else do we know? If they're supplementary, what does that mean?
That together they equal 180.
Okay, yeah, so together they equal 180. So I can say the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is going to be equal to 180 degrees, and that's just by the definition of supplementary angles. Alright, I want you to think about what your next step is going to be. So it says to use the definitions of supplementary and congruent angles. So we already used the definition of supplementary angles. Now we have to find a way to use the definition of congruent angles. So if angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent, Sarah, what does that mean? If
They're equal.
yeah, if they're congruent, then that means their measures are equal. So what we have to say is that the measure of angle 1 is equal to the measure of angle 3. And that's the definition of congruent angles. And then see if you can figure out the next step, because they kind of tell you it. So look back at your plan. Okay, so Ella, what did you put for your next statement?
The measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 2 equal 180.
Good, so the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180. And how did you know that?
Because it tells you in the plan.
Right, it says and substitution to show that the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180. So if we look back at our steps here, we have the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is 180. We know that 1 and 3 are equal, so really we just took this measure of angle 3 and replaced it in the equation. So if we were replace one measure with another, what do we call that?
Substitution.
Substitution. Okay, so this is going to be substitution. And then really, if you guys read the plan, you already know the last one too, right? Yeah, Baron, what is it?
Angle 3 and angle 2 are supplementary.
Well, yep, and then, but what's the reason?
It's the proof.
No, I just said never ever do that. Look at your plan. So what does your plan say?
By the definition of supplementary angles.
Okay, yep, so by the definition of supplementary angles, angle 3 and angle 2 are supplementary. So this is gonna be the definition of supplementary angles. Okay, so remember, prove is not a reason, right? Okay, a reason is a definition, something that's given, which is your first one, or any of your properties of equality or congruence. Reflexive, symmetric, transitive, addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. Alright, so for your homework tonight, you're going to do 2.6, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 16 through 22. Okay, and I'm going to let you get started on that. I'm going to give you at least 10 minutes to make a good dent in that, and then hopefully we can finish with some presentations today. Okay, so remember a couple of things we've been working on in class is starting without being told your bell work, and then working into the bell. So I don't want to see you guys packing up early. I'll place them. Okay, and no headphones today. I will play some classical